poured himself. So now the child emerges, and what does the Father do? The Father anoints it with his goodness and pours himself upon it. Anointing, remember, Christ is the Christos, the anointed one. Also, Christ was baptized in the Jordan. Here the Divine One pours himself his goodness and poured himself upon it. So now the child emerges, and what does the Father do? The Father anoints it with his goodness. What does of both place divine being? Your knowing is, in fact, Pia. But when we read it, it becomes, as I said, the Nag Hammadi discovery was made in 1945 in Nag Hammadi, Egypt. However, before that, we did have some original Gnostic texts. And as you see on the left over here, before the Nag Hammadi discovery, that there was indeed the Bruce Codex, Codex Brucianus, which was purchased in Upper Egypt
bitch.
Gospels or texts, of which the first book of Yehu is perhaps the most interesting, as well as the untitled text, fragments of a Gnostic hymn, and so on. Another text that was discovered beyond, which is the Askew Codex, Codex Askewianus, was purchased in Egypt also around 1785, and that gives us the Pistis Sophia. This is a major text. It is about 100 pages long. However, it occurs fairly late in the Gnostic corpus, and so it gives us a view of Gnosticism around the 3rd or 4th century. The Berlin Codex, discovered in 1896 in Egypt then, gave us the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and our first version of the Apocryphon of John, which becomes one of the most important Gnostic texts. So we did have access to these original Gnostic texts, as well as you see at the bottom, the Acts of Thomas gave us the Hymn of the Pearl, which is a beautiful example of a kind of Gnostic allegory. But once we had access to the Nag Hammadi discovery, which was made in 1945, everything changed. We were suddenly given a direct view onto the Gnostic world. I should also mention the Chakos Codex, as you see on the far right, which was discovered in Egypt around 1970. However, it was kept in a safe deposit box for the longest time, and was only released from the safe deposit box in the year 2001, and then finally published in 2006, although some pages apparently are still missing. Among the texts of the Chakos Codex is the famous Gospel of Judas, and so where we get to hear from Judas's point of view what happened in the life of Christ. That gives you an idea then of the original sources of Gnosticism. So let's now move to the discovery of the Nag Hammadi corpus. And the story begins with these two brothers that you see here, Khalifa and Muhammad Ali. And that they were digging in these hills close to their village, which lies not too far away from the larger city of Nag Hammadi. And they were digging for fertilizer, which was their custom, when they came upon a jar, a sealed jar. So they took this jar out of the earth, broke it open, and immediately all these dust particles and fragments of pages flew up into the air, and they discovered these series of codices. In fact, they discovered 13 codices, and when they brought them home, they showed them to their mother. She immediately took one of them and thought, this must be good for fire kindling. So she threw the first text straight into the fire, and it was burned as a way to kindle their fire. However, the brother did hold on to the other text, and eventually, there's a long story, but due to various family disputes, They were given to the local Coptic priest, who then sold them in Cairo, and in Cairo it was realized by Jean Duras that these are very important discoveries. It took, however, until the 1960s for scholars to come together as a team funded by UNESCO to actually go through the texts and try to preserve them, to put them under glass, to piece them together since they were so fragmented.
Come on, bro.
And finally
Really?
translate them. So only in the 70s did these texts emerge into our culture, and they emerged in this form as the Coptic Gnostic Library, with the Coptic pages on the left hand and the translations into English on the right hand. And then a more popular version was released called the Nag Hammadi Library, edited by James M. Robinson. And since then, we've had quite a few translations, also translations into other European languages like German and French.
I know, I'm so predictable.
So that it has now entered into the public domain starting in the 1970s. So let's have a look now at the 13 codices in the Nag Hammadi collection. And a codex, just to remind you, is a book as opposed to, say, a scroll. The codex is a bound book, and these were bound with beautiful leather covers, some of them even tooled with designs. Codex 1 was actually separated from the rest and found its way as a gift to Carl Gustav Jung, and he had it in his possession for quite some time. And then when all of the texts were put together and collected in the Coptic library in Cairo, he willingly gifted it to the Coptic library in Cairo. So you will find, for example, in Codex 2, the Apocryphon of John, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip. What is an Apocryphon? Apocryphon, as opposed to Apocalypse. An Apocalypse is a revealed teaching. An Apocryphon is a hidden teaching. And indeed, Christ appears to the disciple John in this text and reveals to him a hidden of what really happened in history. You have Gospels, you have Acts, you have letters, and some of the main characters that you meet with in the Gnostic text would be Adam or his descendants, Seth, Shem, Melchizedek, the high priest, Jesus Christ and Sophia, but also the apostles like John, James, Peter, Thomas, Philip, Mary Magdalene, and Judas. All of these having their own versions and indeed their own schools of thought in which they interpret the words of Jesus Christ. Other figures emerge like Eugnostus, Marsanes, Origenes, and Valentinus. But not just Gnostic texts, we also find Plato's Republic, we find Hermetic texts like the Asclepius, and another Hermetic text, the Discourse on the 8th and 9th. So it's an interesting collection. It's mostly Gnostic, but not just Gnostic, and it includes Platonic texts, Hermetic
Cheating
texts,
motherfucker.
and so forth. So the main ones, as I said, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Apocryphon of John, and another very well-known one up there is the Thunder Perfect Mind. And there's a whole series of fascinating revelations over the course of these different pages.
Final round, fight.
If I take some examples then from the Nag Hammadi corpus, and these examples can be called logia or sayings. This one, for example, from the Timorphic Protonoia, I am androgynous. I am the mother, and I am the father, since I copulate with myself. I am the womb that gives shape to the all by giving birth to the light that shines in splendor. Just to give you an idea of the kind of poetry, the spiritual poetry that you encounter, this next one from the Thunder Perfect Mind, I am the first and the last. I am the honored and the scorned one. I am the whore and the holy one. I am the wife and the virgin. I am the mother and the daughter. I am the barren one, and many are the sun. I am she whose wedding is great, and I have taken no husband. Here's a line from the dialogue of the Savior on the top right. Clothe yourselves in the light and enter the bridal chamber. And we will soon learn what this means about clothing yourself in light and entering a bridal chamber. And these last two ones then from the Gospel of Thomas, which is a list of sayings, very much like this Q list that the German scholars suggested would exist, and certainly it did show up as existing this list of Logion from the Gospel of Thomas. Logion 17, Jesus said, I will show you what no eye has seen, no ear has heard, and what no hand has touched, and what has never occurred to the human mind. Logion 18, which is very mysterious. The disciples said to Jesus, tell us how the end will come. Jesus said, what? Have you already laid bare the beginning, so that now you seek the end?
How?
The end will be where the beginning is. And you can see why scholars are so intrigued by Gnosticism, because you have these beautiful texts, these beautiful sayings which don't exist in the canonical Gospels, and suddenly we have
come on, big boy,
into the mouth of Christ, which are pure poetry, and not just poetry, but also very profound in their spiritual and philosophical ramifications. On the other hand, when the Nag Hammadi library first appeared, the way it appeared was somewhat difficult to read because the scholars were being very true to the text. And to be true to the text, whenever they made an emendation and added a word, they did this in square brackets. And very often they had to because the texts were so fragmentary. As well, every time there was a line break, they put a slash. They were numbering each line and also each page.
Bye.
And so reading it, you ended up reading something like this. And then you see also that the language of Gnosticism